Have you ever wondered why it is that people love the beach? Why it is that they find the beach so beautiful? That is a uniquely strange thing, and it's often the sort of thing where, we're going along, let's say rocks and trees and buildings and whatever, and then all of a sudden you finally see the coast. Maybe it's where you've been driving to on vacation, and it's just, oh, wow, that's amazing, that's gorgeous. But why? Why do we find it beautiful? It's not the sort of thing that we often think very much about, and it's the sort of topic that frequently people pass over and say, well, okay, what could we possibly know about it? I like chocolate chip cookies. I like the beach, whatever, who cares? But indeed, there's a lot more that can be said here, because there are some specific reasons for thinking that the beach may offer us something special in terms of an opportunity for thinking and insight, and specifically a discontinuity with normal civilization, not just as a vacation, but as something that is fundamentally uncivilizable. So it's not just the beach, it's the ocean. The ocean has always been historically thought of as a place of chaos. And chaos, for the ancient Greeks, as you may recall, was the opposite of order, obviously, but it was the ground out of which we got order. And you may have noticed, for instance, in the biblical creation story, that, the spirit moved across the waters. So the waters, the dark waters of chaos, the unfathomable abyss. So in other words, the ocean has always been regarded as a place of just total chaos. Now, this is partially because, well, you can't build a building on water. You're not going to do very well there. You don't have any cities on water. You don't have any kind of human civilization. Nobody lives out there really, by and large. And so it's the kind of thing where you can't walk on it. You can't, make things out of it. It just kind of pours everywhere and goes through your hands. Water is a universal solvent, so it has a tendency to destroy everything and, for everything to live in it. And so it's this very powerful metaphorical ground for us for the opposite of human civilization. So it is a very powerful metaphor for nature, the natural order as opposed to the human order. And so this is more like the chaos of the universe, the chaos of nature, as opposed to the order that humans want to impose upon it. And so when we visit the beach and when we visit the ocean and we see this vast expanse of a thing, the likes of which are so large, heavy, full of energy, just in general, ungraspable. It's the sort of thing that is way too big to have anything to do with human civilization. It's the same kind of thing that we get when people are talking about, what do we do about hurricanes? How can we stop a hurricane? Well, first of all, have you looked at just how big a storm is like that? How big those storms are? I mean, frequently the ones that come here in the United States, it's as large as the state of Florida sometimes. I mean, that is unthinkably big for us. It is more than a medium-sized object. It is the kind of thing that we really have trouble wrapping our brains around. And so that's something that when we visit the beach and when we visit the ocean, we take part in, because we see that chaos and suddenly we cannot take with us all of the concerns of, did I check my email? Am I at the office? Am I, responding to so-and-so? Do I need to have this deadline met? And all of the other artificialities that correspond with human civilization. These are the kinds of things that mean absolutely nothing to the surface of the ocean, that mean nothing to the chaotic waters, and can mean nothing. And if you try and set one of these hard ordered things on it, then it just sinks and falls apart and disintegrates. And so that's the kind of metaphorical ground then that we should expect to be very interesting for us and potentially to produce a, good environment for doing things. Now, I personally love the beach. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. I've always thought so, but it provides also a special form of insight. In other words, it provides a special opportunity for insight for us in the sense that it provides a significant discontinuity with what it is that we normally experience in the world. And so when we visit the waters and we visit the coast, frequently we are assaulted with another world that is fundamentally not able to be domesticated or tamed. It's another world that we can't build things on and we can't, enclose meaningfully without it losing its character of chaos. In other words, when I dip into the waters and fill a bucket with it, let's say I'm making a sandcastle or something, then the water conforms to the shape of the bucket, but the bucket doesn't fundamentally change the water. It just happens to be there for right now. And then eventually it goes back to wherever it was. And so no matter how much order I impose upon things, and I'm creating these sand paintings or carvings or whatever it might happen to be, eventually it goes back to nature. And one of the nice metaphors for us then, one of the nice powerful experiences is that it goes back quickly. It's something that you don't have to wait a long time for. We don't have to worry about, erosion over a period of years, centuries, or millennia. It's erosion that happens in a period of seconds or minutes. And so it's very easy for us to wrap our minds around that kind of thing because it's a medium-sized, in that way, a temporally medium-sized object. So there's that, and I think that's kind of interesting. Now, as far as the metaphorics of water go, and this is where we're going to push in looking at what Eckhart does with this, the metaphorics of water have changed over the past, it's really, especially the last few hundred years, but the last few millennia, things have changed in the way that people thought of water and the way that they thought of nature, and then the way that they think of human civilization, and then correspondingly the way that they relate to that originary chaos. And what I have in mind in particular is an observation that I felt that was particularly insightful that I read a number of years ago, is that it used to be the case, and for most of human history, the greatest threat to our survival did not come from human civilization and other people and whatnot. It came from nature. It came from starvation. It came from weather. It came from drought. It came from, lions and tigers and bears, oh my, that sort of thing. It didn't really come from other people. I mean, other people were a threat, but the threat that the other people present to us is dwarfed by the threat that nature presents to us. Well, a few hundred years ago, that ceased to be the case. And it flip-flopped such that now, on a day-to-day basis, and for most of our lives, the greatest threat comes from other people. And the greatest threat to our livelihood and our ability to live and our ability to do much of anything does not come from nature. It comes from other people. And this has been reinforced, especially in the last 100 and whatever it is, 25 or 50 years, where we've had air conditioning. And so air conditioning has made it possible for us to completely enclose our spaces where we are totally separated from by a distinct boundary that we are inclined to keep that distinct boundary so that we don't let the cold air out, and keep our environment just artificially so that we can participate in and live inside of human civilization all the time, such that that seems like that's the real world, and the natural world is something that you go and visit. Well, that is a distinctly unique and new thing in terms of human civilization. It's something that has not been around all that long, but it changes the way that we think about and the way that we relate to chaos. It changes the way that we relate to water and the beach and the ocean, in the sense that the ocean previously was also a great source of threat. Now you take a, intercontinental ship, a voyage by ship. I mean, you don't really have to worry about surviving that much. You are so assured of that you're going to make it that you really don't have to think about it. And so we can visit all of these places without the threat, without having to worry about the natural world too much. There are exceptions, but by and large, it's something that we've reduced to the point where we don't even really think about it anymore. And so that changes the way that we relate to things. Now, Eckhart was part of the old world in the sense that he was still in a world where nature was the big threat. And if there's any doubt of that whatsoever, he died in 1328, and it was only 20 years later that we saw the Black Death in Europe, the Black Plague that killed something like, a third of Europe. It was really, really awful. And that kind of thing was far greater in terms of its impact than any of the wars and than any of the political things and any of the whatever people have to say and do to each other was dwarfed by that particular disease. And that kind of thing was relatively the course. That was the way that things went. It's not so much the way that things go for us now, although, recent history is what it is there. So, but anyway, so Eckhart does something interesting with water. And so I want to take a look at his water metaphorics in particular, because this, I think, will be helpful for us, and it will be a nice adjunct to the discussion of what's going on with the beach. Because, of course, when I visit the beach, obviously, I think of Eckhart. Everywhere I go, right? But so that won't surprise you. But at the same time, it's nice to have that contrast, and it's nice to imagine, how would he have encountered these things? And so what we get, for instance, in sermon number 11, he refers to what is beyond the ocean. And this refers to a distance from the known and a distance from anything comprehensible. And so he's looking at, what is known, what is knowable and comprehensible, what is literally graspable. Comprehension is oftentimes discussed in the metaphorics of grasping, literally with your hands. So we think about knowledge in terms of taking hold of something. And so we even still say this today, right? I've got a good hold of how to do an integral or this period of history or something of the kind. And that's what we mean is an understanding. So when Eckhart refers to what is beyond the ocean, he's talking about what is beyond any kind of comprehensibility. And so this is his way of, okay, the known is what is on shore. The ocean progressively then is what is unknown and is dissolving of any kind of tie to civilization and human knowledge and any kind of human conception. And so what is beyond the ocean then is through a dissolving and after a dissolving of all possible human conception. That's the kind of thing, of course, in terms of mysticism that we should expect. And that's precisely what we get. Now, the same kind of thing can be had if we move on to Sermon 7, where he says, God places the soul in the highest and purest place that she can attain to, into space, into the sea, into a bottomless ocean, and there God works mercy. Now, the word for sea and ocean are the same here, mer. But what's interesting especially is bottomless. So the word for bottomless is ungrundlich. And so this is, Walsh translates it as bottomless, but of course, ungrundlich. So we're talking about non-groundly, something like that. So it is something that does not have a ground. It does not have a bottom. And so thus bottomless, something that is not able to be fathomed, that kind of thing. But ground, of course, is a very important concept for Eckhart. And so the divine ground and any kind of grounding, then he's basically telling us that any kind of grounding, any kind of firm ground, terra firma, is going to be where we are not yet in the ocean, where we are not yet into that incomprehensibility, and we have not dissolved through all of the layers of human conception and flowed back to the divine ground, which is the bottomless abyss, which is, of course, a paradox, right? So the divine ground as a bottomless abyss, it is a ground that is no ground, that kind of thing. And so anyway, so he says this, and he also will go on to say that that mercy, by the way, in this context, you may have been wondering, mercy is God's highest work. And he goes on to say that understanding can never grasp God, can never grasp him in the ocean of his groundlessness. So again, you have that paradox that I mentioned before. So this is the ground of God's groundlessness. So his groundless ground. And he actually uses that phrase at other times, grundlos Grund. So groundless ground, literally. So anyway, I think that's kind of interesting. Now, elsewhere, where we see another common metaphor for water and a common metaphor for the ocean, especially for the medievals, not just for Eckhart, is the idea of a drop of wine in the ocean. So if you take wine and you drop it into the ocean, well, that one drop of wine ceases to be wine. It disperses and becomes, just totally incomprehensibly dissolved. And that's a metaphor for being dissolved into, of course, the, fathomless, the groundless ground of God. And Eckhart refers to this in Sermon 73, talking about a drop in the ocean as something that was insignificant. Same thing happens in Sermon 80. So the drop becomes the ocean. And that's what we are meant to understand, right? Is that the wine is particularity and you drop it in the ocean and it literally, in a very liquid way, flows back to the divine. It flows back to the divine ground and becomes one with the infinite, the indefinite chaos. In other words, the non-definite. So chaos, one way of understanding chaos is that it is non-definite. It is something that does not have a definite boundary, a definite definition, conception, concept, name, whatever it might happen to be. And I mention name, of course, because he's also obviously in this way thinking of Dionysius. And so with Dionysius, we have the apophatic theological version of, the nameless name and becoming unnamed and shedding of all names for God. So, lastly, there's another bit from Sermon 42 where he refers to the ocean as well and saying that I must become estranged from all things. So I want to become estranged from all things that are mine as I am to things over the ocean. And so this is chaos separating us at a distance from anything that is beyond the unfathomable chaos and the unfathomable indefiniteness and the uncivilized, nature of the ocean, et cetera, et cetera. So beyond all possible conception, that's how it is that I want all of my things here, all of what is mine here, all of what I consider to be me, to be relinquished, to be detached from, such that we can then be estranged from all of those things. So again, I must be estranged. In other words, all of those things must be made foreign to me. That's the word. Must be made foreign to me. All things that are mine must be made foreign to me, as I am to things that are across the ocean. So in other words, Eckhart does use it in the same way, and he does do something interesting with it, but it's still medieval in a certain way. And he's not going to have that same kind of modern problem that we have, where most of the threat comes from other people. So for Eckhart, the, institutions and the various problems that people might give you, it has to be necessarily then somewhat local, in a way where they had frontiers. You go outside of the safety of the city and you get, assaulted by highwaymen, or you might, be attacked by a wolf or a bear or whatever it might happen to be. Other forces impinge upon you. Whereas for us, traveling between states, between countries, you drive or take a train, or there's really no threat. The beverage cart comes around and we're in civilization the entire time, which is why for us, I think the ocean might present an even greater opportunity for us to reflect metaphorically on what that means, what human conception means, what being in civilization means, and what pushing against civilization and returning to the groundless ground, the unfathomable abyss of God might happen to be. And that's why I've indicated that Kierkegaard is helpful in this regard, because he encourages us to do war with that, to do war with those conceptions that keep us on the shore and prevent us from taking the leap into the bottomless abyss that is the divine. So I hope this is interesting, different, and I hope it helps. I really do love the beach. That's